Welcome to Schaap One-on-One with the man who was so good he had a month named after him. The man who batted .357 in 27 World Series games, who hit 3 home runs in one of those games, the man who played on 5 World Championship teams, the Hall of Famer, outfielder, Mr. October, a.k.a. Reginald Martinez Jackson. Reggie, thanks for joining us here in Victory. For all your great numbers, 563 home runs, whenever I think of you, I think of 3. I think of a triangle. You, George Steinbrenner, and Billy Martin. You've mellowed over the years. George has mellowed over the years. But when I say George Steinbrenner, what's the first thing that comes into your mind?
I like him. Certainly respect the product that he's put on the field with the Yankees. You'd almost have to say it's unparalleled in sports. There certainly was some down times in the 80s, but the product he's put on the field, and he's been the engineer of it all, I certainly think you have to give him all the credit that's deserved.
The kind of relationship that you've had with him, which is a love-hate relationship at times, have you ever had that kind of relationship with anyone else?
I think I did with Charlie Finley. I certainly believe I did with Billy Martin. I did with some of the companies and places I've worked since I've retired. But at the same time, you say, Dick, what comes to my mind first with George, at the same time, the question comes to me as to why we are not closer, more involved in our everyday lives, just in talking. There are people that you run across in your past, you being one of them for me, a Mike Lupica, Dave Anderson, and there are other people, but people that we all do know when the names, are come out of my mouth, that there is a bonding relationship from years of the past. And the things that George and I have done together and experienced together, I wonder why we're not closer.
Well, isn't it in some ways sort of like the relationship between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier? You guys helped each other, but at the same time, you pounded each other at certain times. I mean, why would you want to be closer to George than you are?
Because as a human being, he is a very large part of my life. The Yankees, New York City, George Steinbrenner brought me here. I will always respect him and always like him and appreciate that is probably a better word. And why we aren't friends, I've never been to his home.
That's amazing.
That almost hurts, and you kind of wonder. It's bewildering. It would be very similar to me to Michael Jordan and Jerry Reinsdorf. Why aren't they absolute friends? To the bitter end. There's nothing I wouldn't do for George, and I honestly feel there's nothing he wouldn't do for me if I asked him. But he doesn't put himself out or offer his hand like you would think, and doesn't make you feel. He doesn't make me feel as welcome as I know I am. That's almost a confusing statement, but
I understand what you mean. But when you were playing in New York and playing for Billy Martin as a manager, did you want to be closer to him too?
Billy Martin, yes. I felt I had a lot more in common with Billy Martin than I did George. Billy was from a broken home. Billy is a mixed background. Billy is from Berkeley, California. I lived in Oakland. Billy was a scrapper. Billy made it the hard way. He was just a tough guy that the people liked and associated with. And I always wondered why, at the same time, why we weren't closer friends, because we had so much in common.
Yeah, and you saw all these things in him that you could respect. What do you think that he respected in you?
Gosh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I do think that Billy thought I was a great performer when it counted, but the fact that I got a lot of attention, the fact that I spoke my mind and gravitated toward the press and became the darling of the media and the darling of the fans, I think that bothered Billy. I think it does bother some people.
How much did it bother you that time that he went out and took you out in the middle of an inning and you guys ended up yelling at each other in the dugout?
It embarrassed me, Dick. As you do say, it bothered me how much. I just felt it was unnecessary, and him creating or showing upsmanship that he was the boss, which was unnecessary. I don't think, and you know, in looking back, and certainly acted differently when I was 30 years old or 20, 31 or whatever I was. Certainly I acted differently and had a cocky air about myself, this ego that offended people. I don't think I was an in-your-face type of guy with authority. I wasn't brought up that way by my dad, and I respected authority, so I don't think that, I think that he was doing something that wasn't necessary, and that offended me.
It was almost like he wanted to put you in your place,
That's
sort
correct.
of. And when he made that comment where he said of you and George, one's a born liar and the other's a convicted liar, Billy Martin lied to me. George Steinbrenner has lied to me. You've never lied to me. You've exaggerated. You've bragged, but you've never lied. When he said that, what was your reaction?
I never paid attention to it. It was like water off my back. It didn't hit home to me because I'm not a liar. And I just kind of felt that he was a guy that made a statement that didn't make sense to anyone. It didn't hit home to anyone. And there were going to be repercussions that he was going to suffer. I honestly, the statement never penetrated me. It was something that was misdirected, never landed, and he fired an arrow that was a boomerang, and it came right back to get him.
We're going to take a break. When we return to 101 with Reggie Jackson, we'll talk about the Oakland years, the years of 3 straight world championships.
There's a long drive. That one is going way up. It is off the roof. That hit the transformer up there.
Welcome back to Victory Yard, to 101 with Reggie Jackson, who started his big league career with a woeful team called the Kansas City A's and helped turn that team into a dynasty called the Oakland A's. Reggie, that was a most interesting team, too, with a most interesting owner, Charlie Finley. Do you remember the first time you met Finley and what your impression was?
The first time I met Charlie Finley was in Chicago at 310 South Michigan Avenue.
You remember it pretty well.
Which was his office in the insurance business. And when my dad and I, who was acting as my agent at the time, you know, just acting as a father, went to his office and went upstairs. His secretary, Roberta, said, Charlie's having lunch. And he had this, he was very much like my dad. He had his desk all covered with this big white paper that you buy fish in. He had fish and clams and shrimp, smoked salmon and sturgeon. And he was mixing it up on his desk, and he was going to have lunch and invited us to have lunch. He had his sleeves rolled up, this big mess out, and he mixed cocktail sauce, ketchup, Tabasco sauce, mayonnaise, and vinegar.
Sounds wonderful.
And that was the sauce that you dipped your raw oysters in, and the seafood that you had. And my dad loved it because my dad was a mess too. I mean, when he went to work, he would go over to the delis and the people and get you know, bagels and lox and fish and white fish and all that kind of
But
stuff.
that confirms my theory that you actually are Jewish.
Pretty close.
Obviously, you remember that thing with Charlie. Charlie was a promoter. Charlie was a con man. Charlie did things like he gave Hunter his first name of Catfish. He had a blue moon on the team. How come he let you get away with just being Reggie?
I don't know. You know, and I probably wouldn't have gone for it anyway. I had too much of my own mind, if you will, and my dad had a strong influence on me, so I was probably only going to be Reggie.
But you were a huge part, Reggie or not, of that team. That was a you know, a collection of unusual human beings, to say the least. You had Catfish, you had Raleigh, you had Vita Blue, you had Joe Rudy. What was it like to be in that locker room? Were you ducking punches all the time? Not you personally.
You know, Dick, those guys, those names that you mentioned, and Campy Campaneris and Paul Lindblad, and the fellas that were really the nucleus of the ball club, Dick Green, they were family. You know, it was the first baseball we knew, and coming up in those days, and I don't mean to go back and have the thrilling days of yesteryear, gosh, they were so special. But all you had was each other. There weren't agents. There was no free agency. You worked for the owner. That was it. You got paid what they thought was okay, or thought was enough, and that was it. And you were happy. And the bond of being together and the bond of supporting each other, because you were ruled by basically the plantation owner, or the guy that ran the roost, if you will. We were his slaves. We were his kids. We were his workers, Charlie Finley, and all owners were like that. And I don't mean to say it in a condescending fashion of this plantation image. You belonged to them, and we all accepted it. And the manager was a person of authority that you feared when they bellowed. And so you became closer because you needed each other. And we were young kids that didn't know anything from anything. And $50,000 was an absolute dream for us to earn. And so that's why you got close, because you were so young and you had a need for each other.
We're going to pause. When we return, we'll continue our conversation one-on-one with Reggie Jackson, the man who came to New York and, just as he had predicted, had a candy bar named after him. And on 93% of the ballots, he was elected to the Hall of Fame, one of the top 15 vote-getters in the history of his game. Reggie, you had your greatest seasons in Oakland. You had good seasons in California and in Baltimore, yet your career almost seems to be defined by the 5 seasons you spent in New York City. Right after you signed with the Yankees, you came over to my apartment, and you seemed supremely confident about how you were going to handle the city and how the city was going to handle you. Did you really feel that way, or were you all frightened about coming to New York?
I was somewhat timid, Dick. I certainly was. I was very confident in my ability because I had been successful for 9 or 10 years before I got here. And I also knew that the ball club was an outstanding ball club, that really no matter what I did, the ball club was going to win. So I was quite sure of the organization and knew that I would fit, that I didn't feel as though I would make or break the team. I felt that I would be a good ingredient for the ball club. I was somewhat timid, to be honest with you, and so I had this bravado in front of me that seemed to make sure I was okay, or let every people think I was all right. But I was from a small town. I played in Oakland. I'd played the year before in Baltimore, and I liked New York. I loved the people, the quickness and their wit, their ability to get things done in a hurry, and their understanding of life. But I don't think anyone can anticipate all the ingredients and the makeup of New York City until you spend some time here, which I'm very, very grateful that I did.
Very early in your Yankee career, you were quoted as saying, "I'm the straw that stirs the drink." And of course that stirred up a lot of different things, not just the drink. When you said it, was that part of the bravado?
No, it wasn't. I was talking to a gentleman by the name of, I want to say, Roger Ward.
It was Ward, not Roger,
Okay.
But he was writing for Sport Magazine.
And he had talked to me about doing an interview, and I turned him off and said no for a long time. Then I went to a place called the Banana Boat, where the Yankees hung out after workout. He came in and we talked. He had no notebook, and I did not think I was doing an interview with him at the time. But he had asked me about my association and relationship with the Yankees and what I meant to the team. And I was drinking I want to say a margarita or some kind of a mixed drink.
You were old enough.
And I was, stirring it, with all the stuff in it. And I said, this club's a good club. They got swept last year 4-0. They were against Cincinnati. They've been to the World Series. I'm like the last thing that they need. And I remember saying that Steinbrenner had said to me, if you're going to go sign a player, forget Joe Rudy and Campaneris, get Reggie Jackson. And I said, I'm the last thing that they need. I'm the final ingredient to get them over the top, to get them to the World Series. And I said it like that.
But because of you were stirring the margarita.
But he put a twist on it, and it was a great quote. I never said it, but, it sounded good. And, if they want to give me credit for it, fine. But I guess I talked all around it. And if you would give it a synopsis, it would be, I'm the straw that stirs the drink.
And the reactions then in the clubhouse?
I got absolutely burned down for it because I had slighted Thurman Munson in the story by saying, I don't know how this ever came out. I don't know if I ever said it, but certainly it was attributed to me, and so I'll accept it. That Thurman could only stir it bad. And that came out, and I made a couple other comments I believe that were offensive to Thurman and knocking him. And here was a guy that had recommended to George he signed me. Then I come in, make more money than him, and George had always promised him that he'd be the highest paid Yankee. Then I make disparaging remarks. The city loved Thurman, the team loved Thurman, and I quickly became an outcast until the World Series. And then Thurman embraced me, and I started to get back in good graces with teammates in the city.
Did you like the taste of the Reggie bar?
I loved it.
That's all that matters. We'll take a break, then resume one-on-one with Reggie Jackson, Mr. October, or Mr. October 18th to be exact.
Jackson with 4 runs batted in. There's a fly ball to center field and deep. That's going to be way back, and that's going to be gone. Reggie Jackson has hit his 3rd home run of the game.
Long drive, center field, well back. Armas looks up, and it's gone. And Reggie Jackson moves ahead of Mickey Mantle. 2-0 Angels.
Welcome once more to Victory Yard, to one-on-one with Reggie Jackson with 563 home runs on his way to the Hall of Fame. Reggie, how did it all begin? Growing up outside of Philadelphia, did you know you were special very young?
I was a good player in our backyard games.
And, of course, you had a good opponent in your father.
That's right. I was, my father played in the Negro Leagues for the Newark Eagles. Need to get that in there for Pa. If you weren't on the first string in any sport, and I played baseball, basketball, football, and ran track, but if you weren't on the first team, you had to come home and do chores. And so, I excelled in all the sports and won what they call the, Athlete of the Year in school, and then went to college at Arizona State on a football scholarship. Right. And then turned to baseball. And I was scouted by the Giants and several other teams, pro baseball teams, probably 10 to 15, and also had a chance to sign a professional football contract at a high school.
Really?
But never did.
You were a defensive back primarily?
I was a running back,
and
played defensive as a defensive back, but I was primarily a running back.
You went out there to play for Frank Kush, who was that sort of a good preparation for Steinbrenner and Finley?
Ooh. Frank Kush was as tough as George, probably tougher. Maybe not as tough as Finley. Finley was very, very tough. But all those people were all part of molding me as a person and developing my character. The tougher they were on me, I think the better person and better young man I became, more obedient, etc. I was raised by a single parent, and so that nurturing of my growth as a child and making sure that I stayed within the guidelines of being a good young gentleman, if you will, or developing the necessities of functioning in society and developing stick-to-itiveness, discipline, and making sacrifices. All of that was part of my father, my oldest brother, Joe, Frank Kush, Bobby Winkles, John McNamara, the people in the minor leagues.
Bobby Winkles was the coach then at Arizona State, and he became a major league
Finley,
manager.
Steinbrenner, they were all part of the person the man I became today. And I don't think I really finished growing as a person that fit into society, Dick, until I retired from baseball.
And you're still growing, I hope.
Yes, I am. I wanted to add that. Thanks for adding that for me.
We'll pause once more, then we'll return to wrap up this edition of Schaap One-on-One, conversation with the Oakland, Baltimore, California, and New York Yankees star, Reggie Jackson. Welcome back to One-on-One with Reggie Jackson, who enjoyed a long and brilliant career in the big leagues and an unbelievable day in the 1977 World Series. Reggie, that day, when you hit those 3 home runs, other players used to stop to watch you take batting practice. Wasn't that a special batting practice that day?
The #1 batting practice in my career. We hit for 5 minutes at that time, And each player in the lineup, I would hit last for effect for the opposition because they stood along the third base line. And I hit probably 35 balls out of 50 swings in a 50-foot radius in right center field. Dick Hauser threw the batting
All
practice
of them into
to
the
me.
stands.
Yes, and when I left the batting cage and circled the bases, between the media of being maybe 250 around the cage and the fans, I got a standing ovation for BP.
Did you get the ovation from the Dodgers too?
No.
Nor when you hit the 3 home runs. It's amazing you just hit 3 home runs in a World Series. No one had done that except Babe Ruth. But you hit them on 3 consecutive pitches, 3 first pitches.
I never thought about that until it was over and people started talking about it. But the Dodgers continued to pitch to me, and listening to the scouting reports, and the great Bertie Tebbetts had given me the scouting reports of where they were going to pitch me. They came right to where he had anticipated, and we had success.
Reggie, thanks for joining us here on One-on-One. Our viewers, I hope, will rejoin us for the next edition of Schaap One-on-One right here on ESPN Classic.